Look at this. A black man driving around with all this tactical gear. You really expect me to believe you're just another traveler? Deputy Colton Briggs sneered as he yanked open the driver's door of Darius Whitaker's battered blue pickup. Without waiting for an answer, he grabbed a rugged emergency radio from the seat and hurled it onto the scorching asphalt, where it bounced twice before disappearing into the dust. He laughed loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "So folks like you always act calm until the handcuffs come out? That quiet face doesn't fool me for a second." The deputies behind him chuckled. Briggs stepped closer, deliberately knocking Darius's driver's license from his hand with the back of his glove. "Take a good look, everybody. A black guy hauling encrypted radios and satellite gear. Don't tell me that's supposed to look innocent." Passing motorists slowed to watch as the deputies ripped open storage boxes, scattering medical kits, maps, batteries, and communication equipment across the roadside. Darius, a calm black man in his early 40s, never raised his voice. "I've done nothing illegal, deputy." "We'll decide that," Briggs snapped. Then the radio lying in the dirt suddenly crackled to life. "Guardian 7, respond immediately." Deputy Aaron Mitchell's face turned pale. His eyes locked onto the weathered call sign patch inside the truck door. He whispered under his breath, "No, it can't be Guardian 7. In that instant, every deputy on that lonely highway realized they might have stopped the one man they never should have touched. Before we reveal why those two words changed everything, tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is. If stories about courage, justice, and unexpected truth inspire you, subscribe and stay with us, because the biggest reveal is still ahead. Hey friends, I've discovered that getting lost is sometimes the only way to find what you weren't looking for. 3 hours before the tense standoff on the highway, the morning sun stretched across the empty plains of western Texas as Darius Whitaker guided his weathered blue pickup along State Route 41. Dust drifted behind the truck, disappearing into the endless horizon. The cab was neat despite the vehicle's age. A folded highway atlas rested beside a rugged first-aid backpack. A locked metal case sat behind the driver's seat. Every item had its place. Darius drove with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years on America's back roads. His eyes stayed on the pavement, his movements calm and deliberate. Every few minutes he glanced at the dashboard clock, calculating the miles still ahead. Whatever destination awaited him, he clearly intended to reach it on time. He stopped briefly at a small roadside gas station outside the town of Red Creek. Linda Harper, the owner, smiled when she saw him. "Morning, Darius? Long drive again?" "You could say that." "You still won't tell me where you're always headed." He smiled politely. "Just helping people where I'm needed." Linda laughed. "That's the same answer every time." He paid for coffee, thanked her, and quietly returned to his truck. As he pulled back onto the highway, another vehicle eased out from a gravel turnout several hundred yards away. It was a county patrol SUV. Inside, Deputy Colton Briggs watched the old pickup through mirrored sunglasses. "There he is," he muttered. Deputy Aaron Mitchell looked up from the passenger seat. "Who?" "The truck." Aaron frowned. "You've been watching him." "I noticed him near the county line. Old truck. Out-of-county plates, lots of equipment in the back." Aaron shrugged. "So?" Briggs smirked. "Call it instinct." Aaron looked through the windshield. "He hasn't violated any traffic laws." Briggs didn't answer. Instead, he accelerated until the patrol vehicle closed the distance. For nearly 2 miles, the SUV remained directly behind Darius. Finally, Briggs flipped on the emergency lights. Blue and red flashes exploded across the rear window of the pickup. Darius glanced into his mirror. Without hesitation, he activated his turn signal and carefully pulled onto the shoulder. His hands remained on the steering wheel, His window rolled down before Briggs even reached the truck. "Good morning, Deputy." Briggs ignored the greeting. "License, registration." Darius handed both documents over without argument. Briggs studied them for only a second. "Darius Whitaker." "Yes, sir." "Where are you headed?" "East. I asked for a destination." "I'm traveling on business." "What business?" "I'm afraid I can't discuss it." Briggs gave a sarcastic laugh. "Convenient answer." Aaron remained a few steps behind, silently observing. Everything about the stop seemed routine until Briggs walked slowly around the pickup. He paused beside the truck bed. Heavy-duty storage cases, medical supplies, coiled rope, portable battery packs, a folded emergency stretcher. None of it was illegal. Yet Briggs's expression hardened. He returned to the driver's window. "Step out." "May I ask why?" "Because I'm telling you to." Darius stepped out calmly. He kept his hands visible. Cars continued passing, several drivers slowing to watch. Briggs circled him slowly. "You travel with an awful lot of equipment." "I volunteer in emergency response." "You have paperwork for that." "I have identification, but some documents aren't for public release." Briggs folded his arms. "So now we've got secrets." Aaron finally spoke. "Colton, nothing here suggests a crime." Briggs didn't even look at him. "I'm handling this." He turned back toward Darius. You're asking me to believe you're just some volunteer driving around with satellite batteries, trauma kits, and enough communications gear to fill half a rescue truck. They're legal." "We'll decide that." Briggs gestured toward the pickup. "I want every compartment opened." Darius hesitated for the first time. "My equipment is organized for work. I'd appreciate it if—" "I didn't ask what you'd appreciate." Briggs reached into the cab himself. Within seconds, neatly packed equipment began landing on the gravel shoulder. Medical pouches, emergency blankets, navigation maps, portable radios, protective helmets. Everything was handled roughly, as though the purpose were not to search, but to humiliate. Aaron stepped closer. "Easy. We don't need to damage anything." Briggs waved him off. "If it's legitimate, he'll get it back." Another patrol unit arrived. Then another. The quiet traffic stop quickly became the center of attention. Several motorists pulled onto the shoulder. Someone lifted a phone and started recording. Whispers spread through the crowd. What happened? Who is he? Did they catch somebody? Darius remained silent. His gaze never left the deputies. Not once did he raise his voice. Not once did he resist. That only seemed to frustrate Briggs even more. "I've seen this act before," Briggs said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "Stay calm. Say very little. Hope we miss something." Darius answered evenly. "You won't find anything illegal because there isn't anything illegal to find." Briggs leaned closer. "We'll see about that." He pulled open another storage compartment. Inside sat a rugged communications case, unlike the others. No labels, no markings, just reinforced black metal. Briggs smiled. Now we're getting somewhere. Aaron's attention shifted toward the case. Something about it felt different. Something oddly familiar. He couldn't explain why. Briggs looked back at Darius. "I think this stop just became a whole lot more interesting." Darius looked at the unopened case, then quietly checked the time on his wristwatch. For the first time since the stop began, a faint shadow crossed his otherwise composed expression. It lasted only a second. But Aaron noticed it. Whatever was inside that truck, it mattered far more than Briggs could possibly imagine. The silence hanging over the highway lasted only a heartbeat before Deputy Colton Briggs slammed the black communications case onto the hood of his patrol SUV. "There it is," he declared loudly, making sure everyone gathered nearby could hear him. "People don't carry equipment like this unless they're hiding something." The small crowd exchanged nervous glances. Several phones remained raised, recording every second. Darius Whitaker stood beside his pickup with his hands folded calmly in front of him. His expression never changed. "I'd appreciate it if you handled that case carefully," he said. Briggs laughed. "Now you're worried." "It contains sensitive equipment." "Says who? It belongs to my employer." Briggs smirked. "Then your employer can come explain it." Without asking permission, he searched every latch around the reinforced case. It wouldn't open. He shook it violently. Metal clanged inside. Aaron Mitchell stepped forward. "Colton." "What?" "We don't have probable cause to damage private property." Briggs didn't even turn around. "I'm conducting an investigation." "You've already searched most of the truck." "And I'm not finished." He tossed the locked case onto the gravel shoulder. Dust exploded around it. Darius instinctively took one step forward. Immediately, two deputies moved between them. "Stay where you are." Darius stopped. "Sir, I wasn't resisting." "Then keep standing there." The crowd watched as Briggs resumed tearing through the pickup. Every storage compartment was emptied. Every bag was unzipped. Every folded blanket was shaken out. Medical supplies rolled across the pavement. Emergency bandages scattered into the dirt. Portable trauma equipment lay beside tow straps and batteries, as though someone had deliberately dumped the contents of an ambulance onto the roadside. Linda Harper's coffee thermos, which Darius had purchased only minutes earlier, rolled beneath the patrol SUV. A passing truck driver climbed down from his cab. "What exactly did he do?" Briggs answered without looking up. "That's what we're finding out." The driver frowned. "Looks more like you're trying to find something to charge him with." Briggs shot him a cold stare. "You want to interfere with an active investigation." The man immediately backed away. Aaron quietly helped gather several medical kits before they were crushed by passing traffic. He noticed every pouch had been carefully labeled. Tourniquets, burn dressings, pediatric airway kits, emergency blood warmers. Nothing looked homemade. Everything appeared professionally maintained. He looked toward Darius. "You're really a volunteer. I help wherever I'm needed." "Who do you work with?" "I'm sorry. You can't answer." "I can't." Aaron sensed no deception, only discipline. Briggs suddenly called out, "Found another radio." He held up a compact encrypted communication unit. Its casing carried no commercial logo. Instead, a faded engraving had nearly worn away with age. Briggs examined it briefly. "Military surplus." "No." Darius answered calmly. "Government issue, I can't discuss it." "There you go again." Briggs walked directly into Darius's personal space. "Every answer out of your mouth makes this look worse." Darius met his eyes without flinching. "My answers haven't changed because the truth hasn't changed." That only irritated Briggs further. He reached into Darius's jacket pocket without permission and removed a leather notebook. Inside were handwritten coordinates, dates, short-coded phrases. None of them made immediate sense. Briggs flipped through the pages. "What is all this?" "Operational notes." "What operations?" "I can't answer." Briggs snapped the notebook shut. "That's enough." He turned toward another deputy. Run his name through every database we've got. Within minutes, the response came back over the patrol radio. No warrants. No criminal history. No outstanding investigations. Briggs frowned. Run it again. The dispatcher repeated the search. The answer remained identical. Nothing, not even a speeding ticket within the past decade. The crowd began whispering again. If he's clean, why are they still holding him? I don't know. This is getting strange. Aaron looked toward Briggs. Colton, maybe we've reached the end of this. Briggs shook his head. No. You found nothing. I found plenty. What exactly? Briggs pointed toward the scattered equipment. Encrypted communications. Medical supplies. Navigation maps. Aaron blinked. Those aren't crimes. They're suspicious. They're tools. Briggs ignored him. Instead, he climbed into the driver's seat of the pickup. He searched beneath the dashboard, inside the center console, behind the rear seats. Nothing. Then he noticed a small, recessed compartment mounted beneath the dashboard. What have we got here? Darius finally spoke with urgency. Deputy, don't force that compartment. Briggs smiled triumphantly. So there is something. It isn't what you think. We're about to find out. Using a flat pry tool from his duty belt, Briggs forced the compartment open. Inside rested a compact docking cradle connected to a hardened communications module. A single indicator light blinked slowly. Green. Aaron leaned closer. I've never seen equipment like that. Neither had Briggs, but instead of stepping back, he grabbed the device. The moment it separated from the cradle, a sharp electronic tone echoed through the truck. One beep, then another. Then the entire module illuminated. Across its small display, encrypted characters flashed for only a second before changing to plain English. Secure network connection lost. The deputies stared. Before anyone could react, another device deeper inside the dashboard automatically activated. Static burst through the truck's speakers. Then a calm, computerized voice filled the highway. Emergency communications relay disconnected. Every conversation stopped. The crowd fell silent. Aaron felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. He had heard voices like that before. Not on civilian equipment. Not anywhere ordinary. Somewhere deep in his memory, something was beginning to connect. Briggs looked at Darius with growing suspicion. What exactly are you carrying? Darius answered with the same calm he'd shown since the beginning. The equipment you just disconnected was never supposed to be interrupted. Briggs folded his arms. Then maybe you should have thought about that before driving through my county. Darius slowly looked down at his watch. Another minute had passed. Whatever deadline he had been quietly tracking was getting closer. And somewhere far beyond that lonely stretch of Texas highway, people were now waiting for a man who had suddenly gone completely silent. The computerized voice faded, leaving only the whisper of the Texas wind. No one spoke. Deputy Colton Briggs still held the communications module in his hand, staring at the blinking indicator as though expecting it to explain itself. What kind of truck has something like this? He muttered. Darius Whitaker answered evenly. One that shouldn't have been dismantled on the side of a highway. Briggs scoffed. So now you're telling me this is somehow my fault? I'm telling you that equipment was active for a reason. Before Briggs could respond, the patrol radio crackled. Unit 12 dispatch requesting status. Briggs picked up the microphone. Conducting an extended investigation. Copy. Any assistance needed? Negative. He clipped the radio back onto his shoulder. We're not done here. Aaron Mitchell watched Darius carefully. Most innocent people grew angry after nearly an hour of questioning. Some shouted. Some threatened lawsuits. Some lost control. Darius had done none of those things. His breathing remained steady. His posture never changed. Only one detail betrayed the pressure he was under. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted to the dashboard clock inside the truck. Not out of fear, out of concern. Concern for something happening somewhere else. Aaron stepped closer. "You keep checking the time." Darius met his eyes. "Someone is depending on me." "Family." "I can't answer." "A job." A brief pause. "You could call it that." Briggs laughed. "There he goes again." He kicked a plastic medical case across the gravel. It slid several feet before striking one of the truck's tires. "I'm getting tired of hearing, 'I can't answer.'" Darius looked at the overturned case. Inside, carefully packed trauma supplies had spilled into the dirt. "I've cooperated with every lawful instruction." "You've cooperated just enough to stay difficult." Briggs pointed toward the locked communications case. "Open it." "I can't." "Won't." "I can't." Briggs folded his arms. "Same difference." Aaron interrupted. "If he says he can't, maybe there's a legal reason." Briggs turned sharply. "Whose side are you on?" "The side that follows procedure." "We're following procedure." Aaron glanced around the roadside. Medical kits scattered across the shoulder. Navigation maps blowing in the wind. 3 patrol vehicles. 2 deputies standing guard over a man with no criminal record. A growing crowd of curious motorists. It didn't look like procedure anymore. It looked personal. One of the bystanders, an older rancher wearing a faded cowboy hat, finally spoke. "Deputy, you've searched just about everything." Briggs shot him a warning look. "This is police business." It became everyone's business the moment you started throwing his property into the road. The rancher pointed toward a portable trauma monitor lying face down in the gravel. "If that man's innocent who's paying for the damage," Briggs ignored him. Instead, he turned back toward Darius. "I'm going to ask one last time." He stepped close enough that only inches separated them. "Who do you work for?" Darius answered without hesitation. "I work for people who need help." "That's not an employer." "It's the only answer I can give." Briggs smiled coldly. "Then maybe you're about to spend tonight in county jail." Aaron frowned. "For what charge?" Briggs didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the communications equipment. "I'm sure we'll find one." Those words lingered in the air. Even the bystanders exchanged uneasy looks. One woman quietly whispered while recording with her phone. "He doesn't sound like he's looking for the truth." Aaron heard her. So did Briggs. He spun around. "Ma'am, put the phone away." "I have every right to record." "Stay back." She lowered the phone slightly, but didn't stop filming. Aaron turned his attention back to the pickup. The damaged docking cradle remained exposed beneath the dashboard. Something about its design stirred an old memory. Heavy-duty connectors, military-grade shielding, a small recessed plate near the wiring harness. He crouched lower. Most of the lettering had worn away over the years. Only a few engraved characters remained visible beneath the dust. GUA-SEV. Aaron's heartbeat quickened. He leaned closer. Guardian. No. That couldn't be right. He wiped more dirt away with his thumb. The final letters slowly appeared. Guardian 7. Aaron froze. His breathing stopped for a split second. He had seen those words before. Not in a manual, not on a vehicle. Years earlier, Rain, smoke, collapsed concrete, a helicopter circling overhead. His Army rescue unit trapped beneath twisted steel after a bridge failure overseas. Communications had completely failed. Everyone believed they were alone. Then one calm voice had broken through the radio. Guardian 7 has your position. Hold where you are. Rescue is inbound. Less than 20 minutes later, helicopters arrived. Every surviving soldier in Aaron's unit owed their lives to the unknown coordinator behind that call sign. No one had ever learned the person's identity. The name had become almost legendary among the rescue teams that survived missions no one else thought possible. Aaron slowly stood. His eyes moved from the faded engraving to Darius Whitaker. The calm, the discipline, the refusal to discuss his work, the specialized equipment. Pieces that had seemed unrelated moments ago now fit together with terrifying clarity. Briggs noticed Aaron's expression. What? Aaron didn't answer. What is it? Aaron swallowed. His voice was barely above a whisper. Colton. What? I think. He stopped himself. It sounded impossible even inside his own head. Briggs grew impatient. Spit it out. Aaron looked directly at Darius. For the first time since the traffic stop began, Darius held his gaze without saying a word. There was no arrogance, no challenge. Only the quiet expression of a man hoping someone would finally understand the mistake unfolding before them. Aaron felt a chill despite the blazing afternoon heat. If his memory was right, if that engraving meant what he believed it meant, then this wasn't an ordinary traffic stop anymore. And Deputy Colton Briggs had just interrupted someone whose identity could change everything. Aaron Mitchell could still hear that voice from years ago. Guardian 7 has your position. Hold where you are. The words echoed through his memory with startling clarity. He remembered the collapsing bridge, the smoke that had swallowed the valley, and the desperate radio calls that no one answered until one calm operator coordinated helicopters, engineers, and medics with impossible precision. Every soldier who survived that day knew only one thing. Guardian 7 never panicked. Guardian 7 never abandoned anyone. Aaron slowly looked back at Darius Whitaker. The composed expression, the disciplined posture, the specialized communications equipment. It all fit together too perfectly to dismiss as coincidence. Colton, Aaron said quietly, I think we need to stop. Deputy Colton Briggs barely looked up from the scattered equipment. Stop what? The search. Briggs laughed. Now. Aaron lowered his voice. I'm serious. What changed? Aaron hesitated. He knew how unbelievable it sounded. I've seen that designation before. Briggs frowned. What designation? Guardian 7. Briggs rolled his eyes. A sticker on a piece of equipment suddenly scares you. It's not a sticker. It's just a name. No. Aaron stepped closer. I served overseas before joining this department. During one rescue operation, every communication line failed. The only person coordinating the evacuation used the call sign Guardian 7. Briggs crossed his arms. Shakan. My entire unit survived because of whoever that was. Briggs snorted. So you're telling me this guy might be some kind of military hero? I'm telling you, we don't know who he is. We do know. Briggs pointed toward Darius. We've got a man refusing to explain government-grade equipment. Darius remained silent. Aaron turned toward him. Mr. Whitaker. Darius met his eyes. If I asked you directly whether you've ever used the call sign Guardian 7, Darius answered carefully. I can't discuss operational matters. Aaron exhaled slowly. That wasn't a denial. Briggs noticed it too. There it is. He pointed triumphantly. You heard him. Aaron shook his head. No. I heard someone refusing to discuss confidential work. Same difference. It's not. Briggs walked toward the damaged communications module lying on the hood of the patrol SUV. I'm sending this to evidence. Darius finally spoke with unusual firmness. Deputy, don't disconnect anything else. You don't give orders here. I'm trying to prevent a larger problem. Briggs smiled sarcastically. A larger problem than you already have. Without another word, he pulled a second cable free from the communications cradle. The green indicator light disappeared. Every light on the module went dark. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then a shrill warning tone erupted from somewhere inside the truck. A rapid sequence of electronic beeps echoed across the highway. Several deputies instinctively reached for their sidearms. What was that? One asked. Briggs stared at the silent module. No idea. Darius closed his eyes briefly. You've just taken the entire relay offline. Briggs shrugged. Sounds expensive. It wasn't designed to fail. Aaron's pulse quickened. Colton. Before he could finish, every patrol radio on scene crackled simultaneously. Dispatch sounded unusually tense. All Red Creek units confirm status immediately. Briggs picked up his microphone. Unit 12. Are you involved with a blue pickup on Route 41? He frowned. Affirmative. A short pause followed. Stand by for further instructions. The transmission ended abruptly. Briggs looked confused. They've never done that before. Aaron didn't answer. His attention remained fixed on Darius. The older rancher, who had been watching from the roadside, stepped closer again. You boys still think he's the dangerous one. Briggs pointed toward the crowd. Everybody back. No one moved. Instead, more vehicles slowed. Within minutes, nearly a dozen people stood along the shoulder. Several live streams had already begun. Comments poured across phone screens. Why are they still searching him? Did they arrest him? They haven't found anything. Briggs noticed the cameras. His confidence began slipping. He turned toward Darius. You've got one last chance. Darius waited. Tell me exactly who you work for. I've already answered. Not well enough. I work where lives depend on coordination. Name the agency. I can't. Briggs slammed his notebook shut. Then you're forcing my hand. Aaron stepped directly between them. No. Briggs stared at him. What did you say? I said no. The other deputies looked at one another in surprise. Aaron had never openly challenged Briggs before. We've held him. We've searched the truck. We've run his records twice. We've found no evidence of any crime. Briggs's jaw tightened. You questioning my judgment. I'm questioning whether we're still acting within it. Silence settled over the highway. The bystanders watched every word. Darius remained motionless. Aaron continued. If Guardian 7 means what I think it means. Briggs interrupted. I don't care what it means. You should. I answer to the sheriff. Aaron looked him straight in the eye. And if this equipment belongs to a federal operation? Briggs hesitated for the first time. Only for a second. Then his pride returned. Then they'll explain it after we finish. At that exact moment, a low vibration rolled across the open plains. At first, it sounded like distant thunder. Several people turned toward the western horizon. The sound grew louder, deeper, more mechanical. The rancher removed his hat. Those aren't trucks. Aaron looked into the distance. Far beyond the shimmering heat rising from the highway, tiny dark shapes appeared against the afternoon sky. They were still miles away, too far to identify. But they were moving directly toward Route 41. And whatever was coming, it was coming fast. The distant rumble continued to build across the flat Texas landscape. Every pair of eyes along the highway turned toward the western horizon. Deputy Colton Briggs narrowed his eyes. Probably construction traffic. Aaron Mitchell wasn't so sure. The vibration carried a rhythm he recognized from years of military service, not heavy trucks, but multiple high-performance engines traveling together. Before anyone could speculate further, Briggs's patrol radio burst to life again. Unit 12, dispatch requesting an immediate update. Briggs grabbed the microphone. Still conducting the search, the dispatcher hesitated. We've received several inquiries regarding your location. Inquiries from who? Another pause. We're attempting to verify. The transmission ended before Briggs received an answer. He frowned. What does that even mean? Aaron didn't respond. His attention had shifted back to Darius Whitaker. The black driver stood exactly where he had been instructed. Dust covered the knees of his jeans, and the afternoon heat shimmered around him. Yet he remained remarkably composed. Most people would have demanded an attorney by now. Others would have shouted. Some would have tried to leave. Darius did none of those things. Instead, he quietly asked, "Deputy, may I check the communications unit?" Briggs answered immediately. No. It may still be recoverable. No. The relay shouldn't remain offline. Briggs smirked. If it's that important, maybe you should have explained it earlier. Darius looked down for a brief moment before lifting his eyes again. There are responsibilities I accepted long before today. That sounds dramatic. It's simply the truth. Aaron noticed something Briggs did not. Darius wasn't worried about himself. He was worried about time. Every few minutes, his eyes returned to the clock inside the pickup. The seconds mattered. Aaron stepped closer. Is someone expecting you? Darius gave a careful nod. Yes. Do they know where you are? I was supposed to report in. And now, I've missed 2 scheduled check-ins. Aaron's stomach tightened. 2 missed check-ins. For an ordinary traveler, that meant little. For someone operating secure communications, it could mean everything. Briggs overheard the exchange and laughed. So somebody's waiting for you. Join the club. No, Darius answered quietly. They're waiting for information. What information? I can't discuss it. Briggs threw his hands into the air. There it is again. He walked toward one of the deputies. Finish photographing everything. Every piece of equipment goes into evidence. Aaron immediately objected. We don't have authority to seize all of it. We do now. Based on what? Suspicion. Aaron shook his head. Suspicion isn't enough. Briggs lowered his voice. You questioning me in front of civilians isn't helping your career. Aaron met his stare. My career will survive. What about your loyalty? My loyalty is to the law. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The growing crowd sensed the disagreement. Phones remained raised. The atmosphere had changed. This was no longer simply a traffic stop. People were beginning to wonder whether the deputies themselves had crossed a line. Linda Harper finally pushed through the small crowd. Darius. He smiled faintly. Linda. I've known this man for years. Briggs looked at her. Ma'am, step back. He's helped stranded families during snowstorms. She pointed toward the scattered medical supplies. Half the emergency kits in our volunteer shelter came from him. Briggs remained unmoved. Character references don't end investigations. No, Linda replied, but they should stop assumptions. Briggs ignored her. He reached for the rugged encrypted radio lying on the hood of his SUV. The screen had remained black ever since he disconnected it. Suddenly, a single green light blinked. Once. Twice. Then the display illuminated by itself. Every deputy stared. Without anyone touching the controls, a short message appeared. Primary contact missed. A second message followed almost immediately. Automatic escalation initiated. Briggs frowned. What is this? No one answered. Then the screen went dark again. Aaron looked toward Darius. What does escalation mean? Darius remained silent for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but noticeably heavier. It means someone else will begin looking. Briggs laughed. Good. And he folded his arms. They can explain everything. You may not like how they explain it. The words lingered in the air. Even Briggs stopped smiling. Aaron's memory continued piecing itself together. Guardian 7. Collapsed bridge, coordinated helicopters, civilian rescue specialists, federal communications. He suddenly remembered another detail. After the rescue mission years earlier, Sergeant Patrick Monroe had gathered the exhausted soldiers together. No one had been allowed to ask who Guardian 7 really was. The sergeant had simply said, "Shakukicham. If you ever hear that call sign again, stay out of the way. It belongs to someone trusted at the highest levels of emergency command." Aaron had never forgotten those words. He looked back at Darius with growing certainty. Could it really be him? Before Aaron could ask another question, every cell phone in the crowd chimed almost simultaneously. People glanced down at their screens. A livestream viewer had posted a comment. Multiple black SUVs just entered Red Creek, heading toward Route 41. Another comment appeared seconds later. They're moving fast with lights but no sirens. Aaron felt his heartbeat quicken. Briggs noticed the murmurs spreading through the crowd. What now? No one answered. Then far down the highway, sunlight reflected off several windshields. One vehicle became three. Three became six. A tightly spaced convoy was approaching at remarkable speed. Darius watched the approaching vehicles without changing expression. For the first time since the stop had begun, he quietly released a slow breath. Not because he felt relieved, because he knew the moment he had hoped to avoid had finally arrived. The convoy grew larger with every passing second. 6 black SUVs cut across the shimmering Texas highway in perfect formation, closing the distance far faster than ordinary traffic. Their emergency lights flashed silently behind dark windshields, but no sirens disturbed the heavy afternoon air. The gathered motorists instinctively stepped farther from the shoulder. Deputy Colton Briggs narrowed his eyes. Looks like somebody finally came to claim our mystery man. Aaron Mitchell didn't answer. His attention remained fixed on Darius Whitaker, who never once looked surprised by the approaching vehicles. Instead, he quietly watched the convoy while the warm wind lifted the dust around his boots. Briggs mistook that calmness for confidence. Feeling better now? He asked sarcastically. You think your friends are going to make this disappear? They're not here because of me, Darius replied. Briggs laughed. That's exactly what someone trying to bluff would say. He turned toward the deputies surrounding the truck. I've seen enough. One deputy looked confused. What are your orders? Briggs pointed directly at Darius. Place him in custody. Aaron immediately stepped forward. On what charge? Briggs answered without hesitation. Obstruction. Aaron frowned. He hasn't obstructed anything. Failure to cooperate. He handed over his license. He stepped out when instructed. He never resisted. Briggs's expression hardened. Then I'll hold him pending identification of restricted equipment. Aaron stared at him in disbelief. That's not a criminal charge. It's enough until we figure out who he really is. No, it isn't. The other deputies looked uneasily between the two men. None of them moved. Briggs raised his voice. Did you hear me cuff him? Still, no one reached for their handcuffs. One of the younger deputies finally spoke. Sir, we've searched everything. We found nothing illegal. Briggs glared at him. You taking orders from me or the crowd? The deputy lowered his eyes. Aaron stepped directly between Briggs and Darius. This stop has gone far enough. Briggs's face reddened. Move. No. I'm your senior, and I'm still responsible for refusing an unlawful arrest. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. Even the people recording with their phones stopped whispering. Linda Harper folded her arms. Someone finally said it. Briggs pointed angrily toward the crowd. Everyone stay back. No one moved. Instead, another truck driver spoke up. You've had this man standing here for over an hour. You tore apart his truck. You checked his record twice. If you don't have a reason by now, maybe there isn't one. Briggs ignored him. His pride had become stronger than his judgment. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his duty belt. You've had every opportunity to explain yourself. Darius looked calmly at the cuffs. I've explained everything I'm legally allowed to explain. Not good enough. I'm not resisting. You don't have a choice. Aaron placed one hand on Briggs's wrist before the cuffs reached Darius. Don't. Briggs looked down at the hand gripping his arm. You want to make this an internal affairs problem. Aaron didn't release him. I want to prevent one. The two deputies locked eyes. Years of working together vanished in that single moment. Briggs slowly pulled his arm free. You've changed. No. Aaron shook his head. I've remembered something important. Briggs scoffed. A fairy tale about Guardian 7. Aaron's voice remained steady. You weren't there. For what? The bridge collapse. Briggs rolled his eyes. Here we go. Aaron didn't stop. My unit was trapped beneath concrete after an enemy attack. No radios, no satellite connection, no way out. We were preparing to say goodbye. The surrounding crowd listened in complete silence. Then one voice reached us. Aaron looked toward Darius. Calm. Precise. Never panicked. He coordinated helicopters, engineers, and medics from hundreds of miles away. Briggs folded his arms impatiently, and Aaron swallowed. My commanding officer told us we'd never know who Guardian 7 really was. But if we ever encountered that call sign again... He paused. We were to assume lives depended on that person remaining operational. The words lingered over the highway. Briggs laughed dismissively. So because of an old war story, you want me to let him go? No, Aaron answered quietly. I want you to stop making a mistake. Briggs turned back toward Darius. Last chance. Who are you? Darius remained silent for several seconds before answering. I'm someone who's already late. Briggs shook his head. Wrong answer. He reached toward the handcuffs again. At that exact moment, every deputy's portable radio erupted simultaneously. Static flooded the air. Then dispatch spoke with unmistakable urgency. All units at Route 41. The dispatcher stopped for a moment as though listening to another transmission. When the voice returned, it sounded noticeably different. Stand by. Nothing more. No explanation. No instructions. Only silence. Aaron frowned. That's unusual. Briggs grabbed his microphone. Dispatch, clarify. No response. He tried again. Dispatch Unit 12 requesting clarification. Still nothing. Then the sound of engines became overwhelming. The convoy had reached the final bend in the highway. 6 black SUVs accelerated out of the curve in flawless formation. Behind them came 2 larger tactical vehicles. The lead SUV flashed alternating blue and white emergency lights unlike any county patrol vehicle. Every deputy instinctively turned toward the road. The convoy slowed with remarkable precision. One after another, the vehicles came to a stop less than 50 yards from the scene. The engines idled. No one stepped out immediately. The heavily tinted windows concealed every passenger inside. A strange stillness settled over the highway. Even Briggs hesitated. For the first time since the traffic stop had begun, uncertainty replaced arrogance. Aaron quietly exhaled. He knew before a single door opened that whoever had arrived wasn't there by accident. Somewhere inside those vehicles was the answer to every question asked that afternoon. And within seconds, Deputy Colton Briggs would discover just how expensive 1 hour of misplaced certainty could become. The convoy's engines idled in perfect unison. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The wind carried dust across the highway, as every deputy, every bystander, and every passing driver stared at the line of black SUVs. Deputy Colton Briggs forced a confident smile. "Looks like federal contractors," he muttered. "They can wait." No one answered. Then the driver's door of the lead SUV opened. A woman in a dark navy tactical suit stepped onto the pavement with calm authority. Her silver credentials rested openly against her chest, though no one close enough could read them yet. She surveyed the entire scene in one sweeping glance. Scattered medical equipment, the dismantled communications relay, the damaged encrypted radio, the crowd recording. Finally, her eyes stopped on Darius Whitaker. Without hesitation, she walked straight toward him. Every member of the convoy remained beside their vehicles, waiting silently. Briggs stepped into her path. "This is an active law enforcement investigation." The woman stopped. "My name is Captain Elena Crawford." She held up her identification for only a moment. Briggs glanced at it, but didn't lower his guard. "This individual is being detained while we determine—" "You've already determined enough." Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. The confidence behind every word silenced the highway. She looked past Briggs. "Mr. Whitaker." Darius nodded politely. "I'm sorry you had to come." "So am I." Briggs frowned. "You know him." Captain Crawford turned toward the deputies. "I know exactly who he is." Briggs folded his arms. "Then maybe you can explain why he refused to identify himself." Darius answered before she could. "I identified myself." "You refused to explain your work." "I refused to disclose protected operational information." Captain Crawford nodded once. "He followed protocol." Briggs laughed in disbelief. "Protocol? You expect me to believe all of this is normal?" She looked toward the destroyed communications cradle beneath the dashboard. "No." Her expression hardened for the first time. "This isn't normal." She pointed toward the damaged equipment. That relay should never have been disconnected. Aaron Mitchell quietly stepped closer. "I'm sorry." Captain Crawford turned toward him. You tried to stop it. Aaron looked surprised. How did you know? I've already reviewed enough. She gestured toward the bystanders. Half this encounter has been live-streamed. Briggs suddenly realized dozens of phones were still recording. His confidence slipped another notch. Captain Crawford continued walking toward the pickup. She crouched beside the damaged communications module. For several seconds, she examined the broken connectors. Then she slowly stood. The emergency relay has been disabled. She looked directly at Briggs. Do you understand what that means? He shrugged. It means he wasn't supposed to have it. No. It means someone tampered with federally protected emergency communications. The surrounding deputies exchanged uneasy glances. Briggs pointed toward Darius. He wouldn't explain what it was. He wasn't authorized to. Neither are you. Captain Crawford calmly reached into her jacket and removed another credential wallet. This one bore multiple federal seals. Briggs stared at it. His expression changed, only slightly, but Aaron noticed. You still haven't answered my question, Briggs said. Who exactly is he? Captain Crawford looked toward Darius. He gave the faintest nod, almost as if granting permission. Only then did she speak. You've spent the last 90 minutes treating him like a suspect. She paused. When, in reality, every person on the highway seemed to stop breathing. He has spent the last 12 years coordinating some of the most complex emergency rescue operations in this country. Whispers spread through the crowd. Briggs frowned. What? Captain Crawford continued. When hurricanes destroy communications. When bridges collapse. When entire counties lose contact with emergency responders. The coordination network that keeps police, firefighters, medics, military aircraft, and rescue teams working together often begins with one operations coordinator. She looked directly at Darius. That coordinator uses one operational call sign. Aaron quietly whispered the words before she could. Guardian 7. Captain Crawford nodded. Correct. The silence became overwhelming. Aaron instinctively straightened his posture. Then, without realizing it, he raised his right hand in a crisp military salute. Every eye turned toward him. He didn't seem embarrassed. He simply held the salute. Years earlier, he had never learned the identity behind the voice that saved his unit. Now that mystery stood only a few feet away. Darius looked uncomfortable. You don't need to do that, Deputy. Aaron lowered his hand. With respect. His voice trembled. I do. Briggs stared between the two men. This is ridiculous. Captain Crawford calmly faced him. Is it? She reached into the lead SUV. Another official stepped out carrying a secure tablet. Without saying a word, he handed it to her. She tapped the screen once before turning it toward Briggs. Several authorization records appeared. Mission timestamps, emergency deployment logs, federal coordination clearances. Every entry listed the same operational designation. Guardian 7. The final page displayed today's assignment. The status line flashed in red. Mission delayed. Communication interruption. Captain Crawford locked the screen. The interruption occurred at the exact minute your deputies disconnected his relay. Briggs swallowed. For the first time all afternoon, he had no answer. The older rancher removed his hat. Linda Harper quietly covered her mouth. Even the deputies who had followed Briggs's orders looked away. The realization spread through the crowd, one person at a time. They hadn't stopped a dangerous traveler. They had delayed someone whose work existed to save lives. And the consequences of that decision were only beginning to unfold. Not a single person spoke. The only sound left on the shoulder of Route 41 Was the wind pushing loose maps across the gravel and the quiet hum of the federal convoy waiting behind Captain Eleanor Crawford. Deputy Colton Briggs stared at the secure tablet in disbelief. There has to be some mistake. There isn't, Captain Crawford replied calmly. She turned the tablet back toward herself and touched the screen once more. A federal seal appeared, followed by a detailed authorization record. This morning at 8:30 a.m., Mr. Darius Whitaker was assigned to coordinate a multi-agency emergency preparedness operation involving state emergency management, federal aviation assets, and regional medical response teams. She looked directly at Briggs. His communications relay was expected to remain active throughout the mission. Aaron Mitchell slowly exhaled. So the relay, Shutia, wasn't personal equipment. Captain Crawford finished. It was part of a protected emergency communications network. The words landed like a hammer. Briggs glanced toward the damaged docking cradle beneath the dashboard. He suddenly remembered pulling the cables free, throwing the relay onto the hood. Ignoring Darius's repeated requests not to disconnect it, the confidence that had carried him through the entire stop disappeared. You should have identified yourself, he muttered. Darius answered quietly. I identified myself truthfully. You never said any of this. I wasn't authorized to. Captain Crawford nodded. Operational coordinators are specifically instructed not to disclose sensitive assignments during routine encounters unless legally required. Aaron looked toward Darius with growing respect. So you were following protocol the entire time? I was, and you knew this might happen. Darius looked across the scattered medical equipment. I hoped it wouldn't. One of the federal specialists approached Captain Crawford carrying another rugged case. Ma'am. She accepted it and immediately connected a diagnostic cable to the damaged relay. The screen flickered. Lines of status information appeared. Several warnings flashed in red. Network interruption. Primary coordinator offline automatic backup activated. Captain Crawford studied the report. The backup network took over. She looked at Darius. They rerouted after your second missed check-in. He gave a slow nod. How much delay? 23 minutes. Darius closed his eyes briefly. No casualties? None. His shoulders relaxed for the first time all afternoon. Several people in the crowd exchanged puzzled looks. Linda Harper quietly asked, You were worried about strangers this whole time. Darius smiled faintly. I was worried someone else wouldn't get help quickly enough. The simple answer silenced everyone. Aaron remembered every moment of the traffic stop. Not once had Darius complained about himself. Not once had he demanded special treatment. His only concern had been the relay, the mission, the people waiting beyond the horizon. Captain Crawford handed the tablet to another federal officer. Begin documenting everything. Already recording, ma'am. She turned toward Briggs. I'll need every body camera recording. Briggs hesitated. Our department will provide. I wasn't making a request. Another federal official stepped forward. We've already secured the digital preservation order. Briggs blinked. What? The live streams patrol radio traffic, dashboard cameras, body cameras, and dispatch recordings are all being preserved. Aaron looked surprised. So quickly, Captain Crawford answered without taking her eyes off Briggs. The moment Mr. Whitaker failed 2 scheduled check-ins, an automatic continuity review began. She glanced toward the crowd. The live stream simply helped us locate him faster. A murmur spread through the bystanders. One truck driver quietly lowered his phone. So so the whole country might have watched this. Natalie Brooks, the local reporter who had just arrived at the edge of the crowd, lowered the microphone she had been preparing. She had expected another routine roadside confrontation. Instead, she had stumbled onto something entirely different. She approached Captain Crawford. "Captain, can you confirm whether Mr. Whitaker is the individual known as Guardian 7? Captain Crawford looked toward Darius. He remained silent. After a brief pause, she answered, "I can confirm that Mr. Whitaker has operated under that call sign during multiple authorized emergency coordination missions." Another reporter's question followed immediately. "Can you tell us how many lives those missions affected?" Captain Crawford considered the question carefully. "I won't discuss classified operations." She paused. "But I can say this. There are communities across this country that are still standing today because people like Mr. Whitaker quietly did their jobs without expecting recognition." The words struck the crowd harder than any dramatic speech could have. Aaron looked down at the dirt where the deputies had thrown the trauma kits. He bent down without saying a word. One by one, he carefully picked them up. Another deputy joined him, then another. Within moments, every deputy except Briggs was silently gathering the equipment they had scattered across the roadside. No one had instructed them to do it. It simply felt like the right thing to do. Briggs watched without moving. Sheriff Randall Vaughn's patrol SUV finally arrived, tires crunching across the gravel. The sheriff stepped out quickly, taking in the destroyed equipment, the federal convoy, the gathered crowd, and the unmistakable tension hanging over the highway. His eyes settled on Captain Crawford. "Captain." She acknowledged him with a nod. Then she pointed quietly toward Briggs. "Your deputy initiated this stop." Sheriff Vaughn looked toward Aaron. "Is that accurate?" Aaron answered honestly. "Yes, Sheriff." "Were any violations discovered?" "No, sir." "Were any charges established?" "No, sir." The sheriff slowly turned toward Briggs. For several long seconds, he said nothing. Then, in front of every deputy, every federal official, every camera, and every witness, he spoke the words Briggs never imagined hearing. "Deputy Colton Briggs." He removed a folded document from his vehicle. "Effective immediately. You are relieved of field duty pending an internal investigation." The color drained from Briggs's face. "Sir, turn over your duty weapon." The entire highway fell silent once again. The greatest humiliation of the afternoon had not come from shouting. It had come from the quiet certainty of accountability finally arriving. Sheriff Randall Vaughn held out his hand. "Your badge, deputy." For several seconds, Colton Briggs didn't move. The deputy who had spent the last 2 hours barking orders at everyone around him now stood frozen beneath dozens of cell phone cameras. "Sir, there has to be some misunderstanding." "There isn't," the sheriff replied. "You acted on suspicion." "I was protecting the county." "You were expected to protect the Constitution." The words struck harder than any shout. Briggs slowly unclipped his badge and placed it into the sheriff's waiting hand. Next came his duty weapon, then his patrol keys. No one said a word. Aaron Mitchell watched quietly as the man who had refused every warning finally faced the consequences of his own decisions. Captain Elena Crawford turned toward the federal specialists. "Reconnect the relay." Within moments, a replacement communications module had been installed inside Darius Whitaker's truck. One technician connected a secure cable while another monitored a rugged laptop. The display flashed. Network restored. Seconds later, the radio came alive. "Guardian 7, this is operations." Darius picked up the microphone. "Guardian 7 receiving." "We have continuity. Confirm operational status. Relay restored. 23-minute interruption. Ready to resume. Copy. Backup coordination remained active. No casualties. Mission objectives remain on schedule. A faint smile crossed Darius's face. Understood. He returned the microphone to its cradle. Only then did he allow himself a slow breath. Aaron approached cautiously. So that was your first concern. Darius nodded. It always is. You weren't worried about being arrested. I knew the truth would eventually catch up. But time doesn't wait for emergencies. Aaron lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. You tried to stop it. I should have done more. Darius placed a hand gently on his shoulder. You did what many people are afraid to do. Aaron looked up. You questioned someone with authority. That matters. Nearby, the deputies silently finished repacking every medical kit, every blanket, every battery, and every map they had scattered across the roadside. One young deputy carried over the damaged trauma case. I'm sorry, sir. Darius accepted it with a grateful nod. Thank you. Another deputy carefully handed him the leather notebook Briggs had taken from his pocket. I didn't realize. I know. Captain Crawford walked over holding a thick evidence envelope. Every damaged item has been photographed. The repair costs. The federal government will document them. She looked toward Sheriff Vaughn. So will the county. The sheriff nodded immediately. My office will fully cooperate. He faced Darius. Mr. Whitaker. For a moment he seemed unsure how to continue. Then he removed his campaign-style sheriff's hat. I owe you an apology. He spoke loudly enough for every witness to hear. You were stopped without reasonable evidence of criminal activity. Your property was mishandled. Your work was interrupted. And my department failed to uphold the standards our community expects. I am deeply sorry. The crowd remained silent. Darius answered with the same calm voice that had carried him through the entire afternoon. I accept your apology. The sheriff looked relieved. But everyone looked toward Darius. My acceptance doesn't erase what happened. The sheriff nodded slowly. I understand. This shouldn't depend on who the person turns out to be. Darius looked around the highway. If I had been an ordinary traveler, if I hadn't known people who could verify my work, what would today's ending have been? No one answered, because everyone already knew. Captain Crawford quietly folded her arms. That's the question every officer should ask before making assumptions. The words lingered over the silent highway. Later that evening, every body camera recording, patrol car video, dispatch log, and live stream recording was officially preserved. Within 48 hours, the county announced an independent internal affairs investigation. The following week, the state's Civil Rights Review Board confirmed it would examine the stop to determine whether departmental policies and constitutional standards had been followed. Deputy Colton Briggs remained on administrative leave while the investigation proceeded. Aaron Mitchell voluntarily provided a complete statement without changing a single detail. When asked why he had challenged another deputy in public, his answer was simple. Because the law means nothing if we stop following it when it's inconvenient. His statement spread quickly through law enforcement training circles. Months later, Sheriff Vaughn introduced mandatory training emphasizing constitutional policing, objective decision-making, and the importance of avoiding assumptions unsupported by evidence. One slide in the presentation displayed a single sentence: "Evidence builds trust. Assumptions destroy it." As for Darius Whitaker, he declined every interview request. He refused television appearances. He accepted no awards. The only public statement he ever released contained one short paragraph. The people who coordinate emergencies are never the heroes. The heroes are the firefighters, deputies, medics, pilots, nurses, and volunteers who answer the call. My responsibility is simply to help them reach the people who need them most. Several months later, Aaron received a handwritten envelope with no return address. Inside was a small embroidered patch. Across the center were two simple words. Guardian 7. No signature, only a handwritten note. We thank you for remembering that integrity matters most when it's hardest to choose. Aaron smiled quietly. The patch never appeared on his uniform. Instead, he kept it inside the front cover of his notebook, where he saw it every morning before beginning his shift. It reminded him that authority could command obedience, but character earned respect. And on a lonely stretch of Texas highway, one calm man had proven that the strongest voice in the room wasn't the one that shouted the loudest. It was the one that never stopped serving others even while being treated unjustly.
True character is revealed when someone chooses integrity over pride and patience over anger. Never judge a person by appearances alone, because the quietest individual may be carrying the greatest responsibility. If this story meant something to you, share your thoughts in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, and consider subscribing for more stories about courage, justice, and the strength of doing what's right.